Welcome to Coffee, Coaching, and Callings, a live podcast created for coaches, leaders, and helping professionals that are on a mission to lead a successful and heart-centered life. Your host today is Laurel Elders of the Institute for Integrative Intelligence, where it's our mission to elevate human potential through the art and the science of masterful coaching. Today's podcast, we are focusing on following your calling, a path to personal integration. And I have with me today two sisters that have not just followed their inner callings, but have dove in head first. So I'm pleased to introduce Paula Francis, the author of 18 Pairs of Shoes. Paula is the co-founder of Gross National Happiness USA. And meet Christine Noyes, author and illustrator. Christine noticed that, quote, she never chose her profession, they chose her, unquote. So welcome, Chris and Paula.
Hi, Laurel. Thank you for having us. This is going to be so much fun.
Yes, I'm so delighted to talk with both of you because you've both felt this strong calling and you followed them. And so I'm just curious, what gave you the courage to say yes?
Well, first of all, I love that you open this up talking about being heart-centered. I mean, I think that's a place where we want to live always. And life circumstances sometimes throw things at you, and we have the opportunity at that moment to choose which direction you're going in. And I think for both of us, well, neither of us, I would say, thought we would be where we are right now.
Absolutely not yet. Right. I never dreamed.
Yeah. And not always expected what life comes your way that will kind of force the issue of where you're going to take this. And those are the real precious moments, I feel.
And they're not always in your face either. They could be very subtle things. It's not always a drastic change. I mean, I've had both happen to me, very subtle moments that made me stop and think, and very drastic.
So, I think the point is to recognize every moment is that moment where you make a choice, whether you're going to be happy, whether you're going to follow your passion, whether you're going to open up your heart. And I'm sure that's a message that your coaches express often.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was reading the other day in a book, The Course in Miracles, and it said, fear is your responsibility. And I thought, oh, that's so heavy. But I was like, but that's where our power is. When we look at it and can get on the other side of it and then say yes to what's calling.
Fear is a very powerful emotion, but it can be used so many different ways, and it doesn't have to be in a bad way. It can definitely propel you in a good direction.
It is something that I had to confront head on. I did a walk around the country, 10,000 miles, most of it alone, a single woman out in all kinds of situations. And I often got asked by people that I would meet along the way, aren't you afraid? I mean, that was like front and center for them, is you should be living in fear. And I think that's what they're expressing to me at the moment is that's how I live my life. I live my life in fear. And when you do that, you get closed up. You know, your options get limited. I found that as I let fear go, and some fear is reasonable, right? Oncoming cars and whatever, right? But most of what we carry with us is made up in our minds, the what ifs, you know, that put hurdles in our way. So if you can release, that was my word of the day. And let go of that, and then see all the kinds of wonderful things that open up to you by allowing new things to come in and fill that space where the fear was um, uh, housed in your body. It's so freeing, so very, very freeing.
I love what you're saying there, because my experience with fear is that it blocks intuition. So when you said you walked across the US and by yourself, I experienced like, oh my gosh, I would be so afraid, but
I was afraid for her.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, right. I can see why, but I can also see that, if you release the fear, how your intuition can show up, and then that leads you to the next step or the next person to talk to, or.
Yes. So I did interviews with people along the way, which is why I walked and I didn't drive or fly to go to different places. I would meet people on the sidewalks, in the stores, in the restaurants, in the bathrooms, and people who express fear always expressed fear of the next place, which became a theme. It's not here where you need to be afraid, but over there, that's the town you don't want to be in. Those are the people you don't want to meet, right? And it was, and I would walk in and I would have a totally different experience than these other people because I didn't carry that with me. That expectation that I was going to be confronted with fear. Because most people are genuinely kind and generous and thoughtful and loving. Wouldn't you say?
Do you suppose they would say it's over there because it's the unknown to them? Is that what you were?
Absolutely.
Right.
It's fear of the unknown. Fear comes in all kinds of ways, right? Fear of who we can be ourselves, right? What happens when you take the life that you've known and it's gone?
I can tell you. I can tell you what happens. Which is what happened to me when I lost my husband. We were on an airplane. We were on a trip. It was part business and part pleasure. And we were flying to Las Vegas for a convention, and he collapsed on the airplane and passed away. And my life, just like that, changed forever. Yeah. So, that's one of those drastic moments I mentioned earlier. But there's been a lot of little ones since then that have led me to what I'm doing now. Yeah.
I think what Chris has talked about a lot is the resilience that can come when it's kind of, again, letting go of fear and letting resilience play its role.
Exactly. There's a lot. There was for me a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. What am I going to do now? And that's normal, I imagine. And the thing about my story is a lot of people can relate to it. It's
not
nothing,
the plain part.
Well, no, the details of what happened might be unique, but the circumstances aren't. And people can really relate to it. And I've heard that a lot from people who have read my memoir. But yeah, it's the resilience. It's what do you do now? What do you do with that anxiety? How do you deal with it? And I think everybody deals with things differently, obviously. And there's not one formula that's going to work for everybody. But you just need the inspiration, I guess.
If we look deeply enough, I think we all have that innate ability and innate nature to be resilient. That's part. Some of the blocks that we put up are self-created. Many of them are. But I'll give an example. so my stories are really, Chris is a very personal story of her journey. I have stories that were related to me by people that I met along the way, and a story of resilience. Harlan, he was a Lieutenant Colonel Harlan Chapman, was in the Vietnam War. I met him in Ohio. He had not told his story publicly the way he shared with me, which was quite an honor. But he was a prisoner of war for 7 years and 3 months at Hanoi Hilton, right? And his experience is something that I can't conceive of. I really can't, but he communicated with others, tapping on walls and whatever. But his message to me was what matters most, which was the question that I asked people that I met along the way, what matters most? He answered it by saying a doorknob. In other words, freedom. You can take that metaphorically and very literally. Freedom to be who you are, to express who you are, to walk through the door. But his main message was to be kind. Just be kind. So if that doesn't show resilience and forgiveness and just
it's an amazing story.
Yes.
He's an amazing person.
Yeah. But not unusual. I don't think, I mean, yes, it's unique, but I think, again, you have it, I have it, you have this ability. We just need to all recognize that.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really beautiful story. And Paula, you did research. Your walk was research. Is that correct?
Correct. So I'm of the belief that we should be measuring the success and progress of our lives in our country based on what we value. And right now, we are have a very narrow view of success and progress using measures such as gross domestic product. And what people report to me, and I think we are clearly understanding and seeing expressed in our communities, is that it's what matters is not money. It's not things and stuff, right? And people would often answer the question, what matters most, with, well, it ain't money. So if we are going to align our lives to our values, we ought to know what our values are. And there's been research on that. And there are other countries that are measuring through a gross national happiness index. This organization, GNH USA, was to say, well, that's there in other countries. Is that also true for here in the United States? And in fact, there was a lot of alignment. But what amazingly I learned along the way was that we're often not living our own personal lives in alignment with what we value, because we get distracted. We get distracted by what we've been talking about, fear, or all the other.
It's easy to get distracted.
Yeah, having schedules and bells going off, and we tend to put off our joy. We tend to think that we have all the time in the world,
which we know we don't.
Yeah. Wow, that's just so powerful. And I definitely see, just being a coach, helping people learn about their values. I'm often surprised, and myself included, I never knew what my values were until I worked with a coach to help me identify it. And it fascinated me that I could grow up all these years and not know that part of myself. And so I love what you're sharing about the gross national happiness.
Yeah.
powerful.
I think we can also, you talk about growing up. I mean, when we were growing up, it was, we had kind of a tumultuous childhood. Our mother was dealing with mental illness. And I think myself, I actually used that as an excuse in my early years to not be the best person I could be, not try to be the best person I could be. And luckily, I think I've outlived that stage. But it's easy to do that. It's easy to put blame on things that have happened to you, right? External forces, when really it's us that are in control. We're in control of everything. I can manifest my own happiness. I don't need anybody else to do that for me.
Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that we are in control of all outer
Absolutely
circumstances, but how we respond to those circumstances. We can play the victim role. I'm a victim. This is, and it builds up all those excuses and reasons why we can behave in certain ways that are antithetical to our happiness, you know, or we could choose other paths. And there's not one or two paths. There are many.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, you know, I view callings and life purpose as really a way to integrate into our own potential personally. And yet trusting a calling can be so scary or sometimes not make sense. I argued with mine. I was like, what? I can't do that. Do either of you, have either of you experienced that, that self-doubt that can come up?
I constant state of doubt, self-doubt constantly, until I just kind of slap myself across the face and say, wait a minute now, get yourself grounded. You can do this. It's funny because it can be the smallest thing or you know, starting a new book for me. I can't do this. It's too daunting. I just can't do this. But all it takes is one word at a time. You know, one word, a word turns into a sentence, turns into a paragraph. It's a great metaphor for just putting one step in front of the other.
One step in front of the other. See what you did, Jen?
I did. That one step turns into 10,000 miles around the country.
Yeah. But there is maybe, and I haven't ever said this way, so it may not be the right way, but there might be a healthy self-doubt. You know, am I doing this for the right reasons? Am I expressing myself in the most authentic way? Am I trying to get something? Am I doing this for the outcome as opposed for the journey? You know, those are good questions to ask. But the nagging, you can't, you're not good enough, that sort of talk, I don't feel like we've done a very good job at teaching children, because I think it can start really young to just be comfortable in their own skin and be who they are, and then keep cultivating that as we grow older. And we sometimes let that drive our lives instead of us driving our own life.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just can imagine a different world this would be if in first grade there was a conversation about values.
Yes.
That's right. It doesn't seem like it's something we should have to or teach ourselves especially in these later years, right? It's something we should have been living with all along, I would think. And it's a good point.
That would have been nice. That would have
been very nice. That would have saved a lot of anxiety.
But don't you think, though, because of what we experience, what anybody experiences, are we given these opportunities to maybe struggle a little bit with them because we need to own them, right? Life is not utopia. And I think we'd get bored with utopia. maybe I'd like to try
Yeah,
it for a
with that,
little while.
with that.
But I think we're given challenges so that we can move through them, become stronger,
Mhm.
learn more about ourselves and each other. So life is a lesson, a constant lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. And an unfolding. And Chris, can you share more about how you experienced your professions having chosen you?
Sure. Well, I lived the first 20 some odd years, my first profession as a chef. And that just fell into my lap. Our grandfather owned a restaurant, and I started working there when I was 11, and I was good at it. So that I kind of got stuck in it. And my parents wanted me to go to college, and I didn't want to go to college, but I gave it a year to satisfy them, but I just fell back on what I was good at. I was good at the cooking. So I did that as my first profession. And then after I got married, I had spent the first 8 years of our marriage without having a day off together because I worked nights and weekends. He worked. So that led to, I was only thinking about leaving the kitchen when I was offered a job in sales, food sales. So it just kind of came to me. And I, as scary as it was, I had never done anything like that before. So I'll give it a try. And I did that for a few years. And then my husband and I opened our own business, which is extremely scary for anybody who's thinking about doing that. But this latest one, becoming an author, was really the biggest calling that I felt. And that was, again, that was spurred on by the death of my husband. I was, I remember the exact moment, actually. It was 2:00 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. It was only weeks after my husband had passed away. And I started, as I'm laying in bed, these words started circling in my head, resembling a poem. And I started putting the words together in my head. And as I was there, I didn't have any paper and pen. So I picked up my cell phone and I started writing them into my phone. And I wrote a poem. And it's called Distance. And I finished it. I turned off my phone and I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning and I read the poem and I said, this is pretty good, which is unusual for me because I'm my own worst critic. But I said, this is pretty good. And I showed it to a few people and they thought it was good. And my sister-in-law, Mary, had encouraged me to write some more poems, maybe children's book, maybe even try a children's book. So I did that. And the books I came up with were based on my husband, Al, all about his pet peeves. He was a great hugger. So the first book I wrote was called Big Al Bear Hug. And mostly I wrote that because I didn't want my great nieces and nephews to forget about him. So I did that. That spurred on another children's book, and then I think it was actually when I was publishing the first children's book is when I started writing the memoir. And I did that mostly it was a very therapeutic thing for me, just get things out of my system. And I started writing stories about our life together, which then made me start writing stories about my childhood. So things just kind of evolved that way. They just happened. They kind of, again, it chose me. And then once I started writing, I just couldn't stop.
Wow.
And then I tried, after the memoir, I thought it might be fun to try and write something that something made up, something I didn't have to agonize over how to write, because it was a difficult process writing the memoir. But I thought it would be fun just to try and make up a story. And I did. And it surprised the heck out of me. And I haven't stopped.
Oh, wonderful. Wow.
That's my story.
your
Way to
story.
go saying yes to that. Wow. And Paula, what prompted you to get involved with the Gross National Happiness?
Oh, well, it was kind of just an extension of what I had been doing, community organizing type work. But I always felt, oh, I could do a little bit more. I could do a little bit more. I could have a greater reach. I never seemed to be quite satisfied without changing the world. When I heard about what they were doing in Bhutan at the time, where gross national happiness was birthed, I just got so excited. So I learned more about it, visited there, brought some people together, and we formed the Gross National Happiness USA to bring that concept here. To me, it was a natural outflowing of the work that I had been doing.
Yeah.
But the walk was, again, well, what are the indicators that you use if you're measuring happiness as your progress indicator? So the best way to find out was to ask people. We thought that was smart. Yeah. So the walk was started in 2012. There were two of us that started originally, went from Vermont down to Washington, D.C. That was all it was going to be. But the experience was amazing. People's response to us, it was less the data at that point, although it's always front and center, but more the conversation. That was really important. So I just kept walking, gave up my home, gave up my stuff. Things shifted in my life. Our parents passed, my kids grew. And I just felt this is where I needed to be. It's that, how do you know your calling? Sometimes you just know, sometimes. Sometimes you don't. And I think that's fine too, because I think just being where you are, wherever you are, is where you're placed perfectly.
Yeah.
That's my belief.
I love that. Yeah. I was reflecting the other day how sometimes we have a life purpose that's very, specific. And other times we're just called to live with purpose.
Yes.
And that's enough. That's okay.
It's absolutely enough. In fact, I think that the most profound experiences that I had walking was when people meet eye to eye and heart to heart, right? And if you connect authentically, I know that's an overused word, but I mean, heart to heart with people, often they would just break down and cry. And because you can feel it, you can feel this moment was meant to happen. Yeah. I was meant to meet you, you were meant to meet me. And that can happen every moment, if we allow it, Of course, the dishes won't get done, but
but darn it.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
priorities. We need priorities.
Yeah. So you're both going to be at the Tucson Festival of Books at the U of A campus, March 4th and 5th. If anyone is in Tucson, yeah, and you're traveling now and you'll be heading that way. That's so exciting. And if any of our listeners want to learn more, how would they find you?
Well, I've got a website. It's called ChristineNoyesAuthor.com and
PaulaFrancis.com.
Great. And I'll put those in the links when we post this as well. And it's been such an honor to be with you both today. Thank you for saying yes to your callings, because we are living in a world that needs people's gifts now more than ever. So thank you both for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much for having us.
Appreciate all you do too.
My pleasure. Well, thank you to our listeners for joining us today. We hope these messages are a lantern to your path as you expand your success as a coach, leader, or helping professional. You can join the conversation further at integrativeintelligence.global. Bye for now.